It's the Cavaliers Basketball Club Podcast.
It's basketball time at the cube. LeBron left of the circle, left of the lane. Gonna go all the way and hammer it home.
Everybody on their feet. Sends it for three. Oh, are you kidding me? It's over! The 52-year drought is over! The Cavaliers have won the NBA championship!
We wanted to go in a different direction. We wanted a different approach.
Sexton and Garland!
That's what they came to see. Do it, young man. Do it.
And welcome to the Cavaliers Basketball Club podcast. My name is Adam.
My name is Colin.
This is a podcast about everything happening with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Our show will focus on the love of the game and, most importantly, our love for the Cavs. We'll be covering the games on a weekly basis, giving you cutting-edge fan analysis, along with dissecting some of the bigger moves taken by the team and the franchise, as we witness their latest attempt to rebuild.
You heard that right. This will be a cutting-edge fan analysis-based podcast. We've been fans for the Cavs for 20 plus years and fans of the NBA even longer. We want to accomplish having conversations about what it means to follow your favorite team. It's hard to get in-depth coverage of a team like the Cavs the way major media markets exist. ESPN hardly covers our games and rarely say anything when the Cavs win. The Cavaliers Basketball Club podcast is what you need for this team.
The shoot-around.
Welcome back to the podcast. We hope everyone is doing well out there. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Excited to be back talking about some Cavs basketball.
Absolutely. Let's get started. As of this recording, the Cavs have a 10-14 record. When last we left our listeners, the Cavs played Minnesota in Minnesota and kept it together heading into the fourth quarter, but shot poorly in those final minutes. Plus, they committed 19 turnovers. Nance looked off and frankly still injured, only making one basket. More to come on that one, unfortunately. The following game, they faced the T-Wolves again, but this time in Believe Land. Jarrett Allen made his first start for the Wine and Gold, and he looked like a man possessed. He had multiple rim-rattling dunks, blocks, and kept the ball moving, scoring 11 points in the first half. Young bull Colin Sexton went to the line 6 times in the second quarter. The Cavs also worked really hard to limit the Timberwolves' outside shooting, holding everyone accountable from the arc, other than D'Angelo Russell.
So like you said earlier, the 19 turnovers were pretty disappointing just because they came off of a Knicks loss where they looked pretty disheartened as well. With Karl Anthony Towns going down, I thought the Cavs could have used these 2 games as a little bit of a pick-me-up to get a little bit of extra footing in the Eastern Conference with their record. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. We've seen the schedule into the future. Their schedule gets really rough. Now, they won the second game, and I thought that they showed a lot of heart and a lot of grit. They still played down to the Timberwolves somewhat. They're still a much better all-around team than what they showed in the win. And it was awesome to hear that Garland took a lot more responsibility, really bounced back in that second win. And it was really cool to see Jarrett Allen just, you reference it, like Allen looked like a beast among boys. I thought his dunks were extremely disheartening to the Timberwolves and changed the face of whole possessions and quarters, and just you could just tell because he started the second game, it really established him getting all these blocks, and then the rest of the team, it just like filtered through for some, it was like a magic, spell for whatever reason.
For the first game, it was very disappointing. It's always hard to see a team with a lot of talent, as the Cavaliers have, coming in and facing a team with lesser talent and playing down to that. They played well in the first half. I'm always nervous when we don't have more of a lead against a team like this.
Yeah.
So 61-55 was not good enough for me, and I had some reservations with what was going to happen. But really, for the rest of the week following, I think this was the first game that I started noticing that we cannot score in the fourth, and therefore we're not finishing our games.
Yeah.
A lot of our losses were getting less than 20 points in the fourth quarter, and this was one of those games. We had 18 points to their 21 points, so the game was winnable. We only lost by 5, and we allowed a guy, an Anthony Edwards, to score 23 points on us when he averages 14. So when you look down the stat line and you see that we were able to hold most of their stars, quote-unquote stars, that were available that night to their averages. It's a guy like that. Well, you let him score 10 more points on you, you lost by 5.
Edwards was the number 1 pick in the draft, but people thought this was an average draft class. And Edwards seems like a great kid. He's a freak of nature. I mean, he's just like a bowling ball out there. But you can tell he's really trying to figure out how to play basketball still.
Yeah.
He doesn't look as lost as a lot of number 1 picks in the past. The Cavs allowed him to dictate his spots too often and take advantage of certain discrepancies or letdowns by them.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, it's nice to see a young kid taking number 1 do well, but I don't want to see him do well against our team.
Never.
So for game 2, I think they corrected a lot of these issues. They had Anthony Edwards actually average his point total, which is helpful. And I think the biggest difference maker for game 1 to game 2 was Jarrett Allen. We played him 15 minutes in game 1. Game 2, he played 35. He had 23 points and 18 rebounds. So obviously, you know, the guy's a stud. He's waiting on the bench. I've had my thoughts about Drummond, you know, kind of sticking with this season for the Cavs, and you could have Allen kind of work his way into that starting role for next season. But games like that prove that Allen is kind of he's ready to assume the role.
Against the Clippers, the backcourt played phenomenally, with Sexton leading the team with 27 points and Garland putting up another 23. But the Cavs didn't even take a 3 until the third quarter. Both of these young guards played into the Clippers' hands by settling for mid-range shots and or going to the rim. Additionally, Okoro is continuing his strong defensive effort by manning up on Kawhi Leonard.
Well, I was excited when the game started. I thought we had a good chance to kind of remain with them. And we did that all the way up until the third quarter. That's when they came out and they blew the roof off. They scored 10 or 12 points in a row on us. You mentioned Dylan Windler. He continues to impress me. I have to admit, every podcast until I get over it, that I was wrong about Dylan Windler. I don't think he's going to be some all-star or anything. I'm just impressed with his ability to go out there and scrap for the ball and remain a defensive presence. I didn't think he would be that for the Cavs. Case in point, one of my favorite plays of the game early on, Windler dove for the ball twice onto the grounds, like slamming his body down on the ground after he had tipped the inside pass and created the steal opportunity in the first place. But unfortunately, it was recovered and sunk for a 3.
Yeah.
That's the way things go with the Cavs a lot of the time. It's like, oh, yes, it's got... Oh. The Fro, Jarrett Allen, again, an amazing game for him. At the 5:30 mark, he made yet another one of his signature pancake blocks underneath. He scooped it up for the rebound, tossed it to Prince, who then lobbed it up court for a beautiful two-handed slam by Ice, the young rookie Isaac Okoro. I thought that Stevens, you know, he continues to be another gem of a role player sitting on the bench every night. I don't understand why we're not playing him more. I suppose there are just certain matchups that don't work, and I'm not as close to it as JB is. But I would like to see him get more consistent minutes out there, maybe 8, 10, 12 minutes a night. You know, we could rotate him in for certain defensive looks at least. He gives us a lot when he's out on the court, I think, defensively.
For sure.
And right now, with Nance being out, he has to be more of the rotation. Most nights, Colin Sexton, he scores over 20 points. We win. He had 27. Darius Garland had 23. So the backcourt looked great. And one final point, someone named Ivica Zubac had 16 boards, and he averages half of that this season.
Jeez.
That's another element of why we lost the game. You know, you can't allow somebody to come out and double their stats on you, especially when who is that person?
The thing about the Clippers game, you're right. They started off really strong in the first half. We've brought them up a few times. We're going to continue to bring them up. Drummond did not play well in this game at all. There were times when the offense just would be completely stagnant with him being involved. He shot 30% from the field. He would do this weird thing. The Clippers center would look like he was like 8 feet taller than him. And it was just very frustrating.
He'd get low.
Yeah, he gets low. It's like, you're 6'11", man. Use your arms. To point out a couple positives, Stevens, I thought, was a great little wrinkle, too. He clearly frustrated Kawhi Leonard for a few possessions. I think Bickerstaff wanted him to do that again in the second. It just wasn't as effective. I'm going to talk about Isaac Okoro a little bit more. He is a rookie, and Okoro is having to mark Kawhi, He's having to mark Paul George in this game. The previous game, he's marking Russell, their best player. Before that, he just happens to, have to play Jaylen Brown and the Celtics. He's just always having to take their best player, and he does it every night, and you don't hear anything about some infighting or frustration from him or anything like that. He just takes the assignment and does his best, and his best is extremely good for a guy that's barely played 20 NBA games. He's manning up against these grown men of NBA superstardom, and he's really putting in a lot of good work.
Isaac Okoro has met my expectations because I've believed that he could do what he's doing. And yet, even in these games, he exceeds my expectations because I didn't think he would do that. I didn't think they would put him up against LeBron. I didn't think they'd put him up against Kawhi.
Yeah.
And keep him there all night long.
Yeah.
Now, granted, he has the stamina to be able to do it right now. He's young. But clearly, the fundamentals that he's been practicing and working on over the last years of his life have paid off because the guy has prioritized a part of the game that most people aren't prioritizing. And so it bumped him up higher in the draft picks, but I think we're still going to see a greater offensive side to him down the road. Because to me, seeing him being able to be this good defensively right out of the gate, now he's in a league that prioritizes offense that's going to make him shoot the ball and learn how to shoot the ball in a different way. And hopefully that will translate in the next 2 or 3 seasons to him scoring, 15, 20 a night. That's my hope for Isaac Okoro. Coming off the loss to the Clippers, the Cavs faced the Milwaukee Bucks in 2 straight contests at home, back-to-back nights. In both games, the Cavs played strong in the first half, but just couldn't keep up with the Bucks for the full 48. Highlighting the first matchup, the Cavs had 7 players in double digits and attempted quite a few three-pointers, putting up 32 shots from beyond the arc. Sexton and Drummond led the Cavs with 19 and 18 points apiece. However, they were outscored 63-42 in the second half. The second night didn't go much better. Drummond put in 28 points, Garland and Sexton each contributed 17 apiece, but the rest of the squad were not able to contribute. They did, however, keep the Greek Freak quiet in the first half, yet the Cavs were still behind. To add insult to literal injury, as we said, Nance Jr. is out for 6 weeks.
So the Cavs just played the Bucks and lost both games. They showed, I guess, heart is the best way to explain how they performed. They did pretty admirably. I think going into both of these matchups, the Bucks are an elite team, and they should get out of the East, and they should finally go to the NBA Finals if they have any ability to get over that hump. They are just hands down the elite team in the East. Giannis is, they call him the Greek Freak for a good reason, right? They did a pretty good job against him in 1 quarter or a half, but then he would just take over. You alluded to this earlier. The biggest kind of kryptonite with this team right now is the fact that they can't finish games well, and that really showed up in both of these games. They were with the Bucks for most of each first half, and they weren't able to stay with them. The Bucks are really defensively sound, and the Cavs' young point guards still showed up in a way that I thought was promising, where Sexton's always been a guy who is a little, I think this season is the first season where finally people are like, yes, Sexton has it. And it was good to see that Sexton was able to play against Drew Holiday, who is considered one of the best defensive players in the league, and actually get to certain spots, draw fouls, kind of move around and get things going. Where I think last year, whenever that was, 4 years ago, I think Sexton would have struggled with that. He would have even struggled with that like 3 or 4 games ago. And for whatever reason, he's maturing. He isn't quite there to be like the elite echelon guy, but I think that there's a level of like the fact that he's able to get where he needs to go against a guy like Holiday is really, really cool to me.
Yeah, it's a rough shoot around this episode. We've had nothing but losses that we're covering in the opening here. The Bucks games turned out basically the way that I expected. I think I had seen one of their games right before we played, and they it was the Indiana Pacers game where they were blowing them out by almost like 40, 50 points at one point. They're clearly a very talented team, and with Giannis, he's physically one of the closest comparisons to LeBron, physical comparisons that I can think of in the last 10 years. especially now that he's growing even more into his body and reaching his kind of prime years. He's just one of the toughest matchups in the league, and I think we did the best that we could, at least against him. I was more disappointed that we allowed as many threes as we did, and that we gave up 123 and 124, back to back. We have to figure out a way to limit teams to 100, 110, and no more than that.
Yeah.
That's going to be tough. The first night, 7 guys were in double figures with their shooting, which is usually a sign we're going to win. But Sexton only had 19 points. So that is a stat I usually like to see, but it didn't help us out. And part of that, I think, was that Garland shot 6 of 14. He was 1 of 3 from the arc, a putrid 33%. If he's supposed to be able to make it from anywhere, then why not 22 feet and 2 inches more consistently? I think he has nothing but upside to his game, but on the nights where he can't put it in the bucket or he's shying away from taking a distance 3, that's not going to help us win, and it didn't help us that night. Yeah, the Cavs just need someone to step up and make threes more often. I'd like it to be him. And as you stated, just abysmal fourth quarters, abysmal second halves. We're staying in the game until we're not. We have our first halves going well, and our second halves were falling on our face, especially with the fourth quarter. 16 points in the first game and 22 in the second. If we continue to play poorly down the stretch in the final minutes, we're not going to have a chance.
You have to finish games, and yes, it's expected that might not happen against the Bucks, but this is a trend. It might be the title of this podcast. I don't know, but you have to finish the game, right? I don't know if JB needs to just try different looks. They did really well when JB took over finishing games, and I know that they have some guys out, but something kind of has to shift.
Let's go to the tape.
This week, we're going to be covering the importance of Larry Nance Jr. to the Cavs and how we feel about the Allen Drummond situation. Colin, why don't you take the lead?
I think Larry Nance is honestly what I would love to be as an athlete if I ever was, and what I look for in an athlete. I don't even know if he's humbled by the situation, but he's modest about the situation, but confident in his play. And he's always been a Cavs fan, obviously, because his father played for the Cavs and he grew up in Northeast Ohio in the Akron area. And he's just a guy who I think it's so awesome and refreshing to see the Cavs have a player like him. When they traded for him, I remember you and I were just ecstatic that we got him. And I know that he came into the league in kind of a weird way. My understanding, he had done a couple interviews and he kind of was told at first that like, oh, he's a center through and through from the Lakers, and the guy's 6'7". And it's just like, no, he has more talent than just that, right? He's not just a rebounder. And so Nance is just a player that the Cavs haven't had in a long time, in the sense of when LeBron left, the fact that they've had a guy like Nance on the team has been so helpful. When LeBron left the first time, they didn't have anybody like that. A lot of those guys, they might have liked the area or Cleveland, or they might have still had a lot of, good friendships with the Cavs staff. But Nance wants to be in Cleveland every day playing on that basketball court as a Cavalier, which is just so amazing to see. As a Northeast Ohio sports fan and as a Cavs fan specifically, it's just really, really cool.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a common thing for people to be Cavs fans without spending some time in this part of the country. Mm-hmm. You just have to be in Cleveland at some point in your life to appreciate Cleveland and appreciate Northeast Ohio. We're the butt of a lot of jokes and movies and TV shows and stuff like that. So it is, unfortunately, the sad truth that it's important to have these types of players that already value this place and that are going to come here with the right attitude, not like, oh, geez, pit stop in Cleveland, where's next? And they also enrich the fan base by being that player that comes in with that attitude and says, the Cavaliers, the Cleveland fans, everybody has a high level of importance and there's value here. And sad but true, but Chicago and LA and even San Antonio, those other places, a lot of those places are destinations people believe they want to go.
Right.
So it's not about needing to make it a great place, And Larry Nance makes us great by lifting us up in the same way LeBron did, by saying, hey, this region has importance, this team has importance.
So we're obviously we're talking about Nance because he is going to be out for at least 6 weeks with an injury to his hand. I believe he broke one of the small bones in his hand.
He fractured a bone in his hand.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, we're talking about his character and we're like, oh, he's a gritty dude from Northeast Ohio. He's also good at basketball. It's also so cool to see that the Cavs brought in this guy and said, oh no, you're gonna play the 4 and you're gonna man up on the 3 and you're gonna start shooting from the outside. We embraced his game. I remember one of the first games he played with LeBron. LeBron kept setting picks for him and Nance would hit these jumpers from just inside the arc. And he did that. He torched the team. I think he got like 22 or 25 that night. Because LeBron and the Cavs and the team was like, no, this guy can shoot. He can move. He can do all these extra things. He's a great passer for his size. Obviously, his energy, what he's been doing for the Cavs this year, for this season, stepping up in Kevin Love's role while Love is recovering from injury. I mean, right now he ranks 3rd in the NBA in steals with 1.9 a game. He's averaging just under 10 points and almost 7 rebounds and 3 assists. You all will get really sick and tired of how many times I say Nance is, he's a glue guy. He's just this guy that you want to see playing basketball every day.
And I agree with you. I think he's been kind of the unspoken MVP of this team this season. When he's not on the court, we are considerably less of a team defensively. And I think he even brings a presence offensively that he's one of those players that doesn't need to have the ball to affect the ball's movement on the court and whether or not the Cavs are going to have a positive outcome. I don't think they're moving the ball as well when he's out, and I also think that they're not as cohesive of a team. They just don't seem like they gel as well together without him out there. So it's going to be we're really going to miss him here in the next 6 weeks with him being out. And I hope it's not a long-term issue with his hand. When I heard it was a fracture and that he'd miss some time, I thought, oh, okay. But then he went into surgery and had a plate with 12 screws put into his hand. So, that could be arthritic. That could be all kinds of issues down the road. We have to hope that Larry is not going to have any long-term effects from this. All right, well, now that we're turning away from our love for Larry Nance Jr., it's not creepy, Larry. Don't worry. We'd like to talk about Andre Drummond and Jarrett Allen and the situation that the Cavs are in now with, do we keep Drummond for the rest of the season and allow him to be that quote-unquote veteran presence that can help out the younger guys? Or do we move on from him, put Jarrett Allen in the starting position, and whatever pieces we get in the trade, we'll foul out Jarrett Allen's spot on the bench? You know that Andre Drummond has been one of my favorite players since he joined the Cavaliers. I think he's given us the right attitude on the court. I think he's made us have a more sure presence with the entire team, and the young guys seem to be responding to that. Jarrett Allen, though, that's a different conversation. I wasn't willing to give up on this idea of having Drummond stay on the team. When we got Jarrett, I thought, all right, great. We'll use both. I could envision some nights needing to go to a taller lineup and we would play both guys in the starting lineup. I could see a lot of potential with how we would play with our rotations, and some nights, Drummond could play half his minutes and other nights Allen would play half his minutes, and they could spell each other. And I thought that Allen could learn more from Drummond. He's only 22, as we've stated the last podcast. He's a young guy that's still trying to learn his place in the league and learn from the guys around him. For me, Drummond was a keeper until Allen came out and scored 23 points and had 18 boards in his start against Minnesota at home. Drummond on certain nights, what has kind of turned me away from his game and away from what we may need long-term at the Cavaliers. And no offense, Andre, you're an amazing basketball player, and I really, really love your game. But there are some nights that you kind of take it on yourself, that you say, okay, we're down now by 10 or 15, and we can't get the ball in the bucket, so I'm going to start posting up and just backing in, and I'm going to throw that thing up there, and I'm going to will it into the basket. The problem is it hasn't been going in the basket. And the more he tries to will the team to a win rather than just getting the team to work together and do it together, you just see that lead slip further and further away. They're slower on their transition defense. He can't get back in time, and we've given up another 3. Allen's a little quicker on the court, and we just play a different style of game. Plus, he's never kind of going, okay, this is up to me. I'm going to take over now, and maybe one day he will. But right now, I think Drummond, he's kind of playing his way off of the team. Simply from his inability to know when we need him to go one-on-one in these matchups, and when to start involving the team more and just getting the other guys to build their confidence back up. When Sexton's not hitting his shots or Garland's not hitting their shot, Jetty's not hitting his shot, he should be pulling them aside and talking about continuing their rotations on the court, getting the ball moving. Instead, he's kind of grabbing the ball and slowing everything down. So in that way, I'm finding a clearer path to the Cavaliers moving on from Drummond and allowing him to either be bought out at some point, which I never like, or to be traded away for more valuable pieces, which I think the Cavs are still trying to figure out what this team is. Yes, I'm excited about the talent that they have collected, but it still feels like they're missing maybe 2 pieces that they need. I don't know what that is specifically, but Andre Drummond now with Jarrett Allen and then possibly with McGee and us trading him away, it's just a really tough time with Drummond's position, knowing that we don't know what's going to happen with Love. We don't know what's going to happen with McGee. And now Nance is out for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
We used to seem stacked at the center and at the power forward positions. Now we feel light again.
Yeah.
And it's tough to know if we do pass Drummond on, we'll need someone to come in and still be able to fill some minutes for Allen when he can't be out on the court, and to still maybe be a mentor for him and help him continue to grow within the post and outside of the post too, because I think Allen has the potential to hit more shots, 15-footers, maybe even an occasional 3. He's got a nice look to his shot for a big guy.
So, yeah, we've talked about Drummond a lot. I agree. There are aspects of his game that you watch and you're just excited about. One of the larger aspects that I really like about him is his size. And I also think, too, like, Drummond is a really solid passer, and he has the ability to use a little bit of his handle when he uses it correctly and not turn it over. But he's talked about how he's been doubled more this season sometimes. Okay, well, that means there's an open player and you're a good enough passer. I mean, he had some really good lead passes to Sexton in some games, and he's been able to find the open guy. I think that, you know, you hit the nail on the head with late in game. You know, this whole podcast, we've really been harping on finishing the game. And there are just times when Drummond, it seems like he just gets stuck in his own head, or he's just thinking, all right, I'll get it in the paint, I'll get an and one, and then that doesn't happen. And then he'll get the ball back somehow and he'll say,
Right,
I'm going to get it in the paint and get an and one. And you're just like, okay, we tried that already. It's awesome that he's given this team so much confidence. I don't think that can be taken lightly, especially for what the Cavs have been dealing with since Sexton was drafted, Beeline, and just not being great, and Ty Lue getting fired early into the season. The point is more of Drummond has aspects of his game that are enjoyable. His game can fit in with other teams, and I think he can be a little bit of a better asset for another team now. Since we have Allen, yes, it's just one start, but one of the big things with him is he used his size and presence a little bit better because he has that 7'6" wingspan, and he was able to get the ball to the baseline in the 3-point arc with ease, which I thought was helpful because it moved the ball on offense better.
We had a few statistics that we thought maybe we would mention, but the one that really sticks out to me that we've learned recently is that Drummond is the second worst high-volume post-up player this season. He's averaging about 0.84 points per possession. That's not even 1 point per possession, and is shooting 45.6% on 5.9 post-ups per game. The only player who's worse is Russell Westbrook, who is shooting 30% and averaging 0.58 points per possession. Yikes.
And this is in the post?
Yeah, Russell Westbrook, a player that isn't really supposed to be in the post,
Who's a point guard?
is the only person that's worse than Drummond at what Drummond is supposed to be good at. So
Yeah.
he's not... I love his tenacity. I love his fire. He's challenging guys underneath and taking them on one-on-one, but he's not getting it in the bucket, and that has to change. Sadly enough, I think we could move him in the trade deadline, and we would be better off. If he does stay, I hope we find a way to incorporate him for future basketball with the Cavs. If not, I just hope we end up getting something for him on the way out the door, because he's an amazing talent in the league, and he reminds me of what centers used to be in the NBA. I miss those centers, and I think his best basketball is ahead of him, but unfortunately, probably not with the Cavaliers.
the final seconds.
Rounding out today's podcast, here are a few things we wanted to highlight before this week's games. The next 5 games will be brutal for the Cavaliers. They play at Phoenix, Denver, Portland, LA, the Clippers again, and Golden State. They're matching up against teams with upper-level talent, such as the Suns' Devin Booker and the Nuggets' Nikola Jokic, who, fun fact, is the first center since Kareem to put up 50 points and 10 assists in their loss to the Kings. So that should be fun. Oh, and there's Kawhi Leonard and Steph Curry waiting for us too. So, how screwed are we, Colin?
Pretty screwed, Adam. These teams are, they put up a lot of gaudy numbers. Our defense is a really solid defense, but we have not dealt with firepower like this all season. Booker, the Joker, these players are just phenomenal. On top of that, we're dealing with the Clippers again. Paul George is injured, so that might help us a little bit. And the Warriors are still recovering they still have Clay out. But Steph is just shooting. I think I've seen him make 7 shots from the bleachers during games. They just have him just walk into the stands and they allow it. I want them to come out of this road trip with some sense of resolve as to, even if they lose every game, that they know that they can compete. And I want them to be in situations where I don't want them to lose by as much as they've lost against the Bucks, because all of these teams are fantastic and they're frightening. They're not as good as the Bucks are. The Bucks are, I think, the best team that they've played all season, through and through, as far as chemistry is concerned, and just, a team that knows each other. If they're able to only kind of lose by 10 or so in each of these and keep it close, I will be proud of the Cavs. Even though we've kind of harped on them a lot in this podcast, and we will keep harping on them because we're fans, I think this is one of the first years in a while that I've been kind of proud to be a Cavs fan because of their scrappiness and their resolve in each quarter. So how screwed do you think we are, Adam, on a scale of 1 to 100?
101. This goes to 11. Yeah, no, we're gonna have it rough. If there's anything I've known from the last 20 years of being a Cavs fan and observing kind of the differences between the East and the Western conferences, they've been grooming the right kind of basketball for a long time, and the East has been trying to catch up for a long time. Mm-hmm. When LeBron went west, it really shifted the balance even more to the Western Conference. Anytime we face somebody from that side of the country, I'm pretty concerned that we're going to have a tough go. That I think that the Lakers are less of a team this year than they were last year, and I think that the Nets are kind of a joke on paper. They look good, but in reality, I don't know if that's going to work this season. So the teams that we've faced that have these superstars and amazing firepower, we were able to keep up with them for half of the games. Yeah. But then we can't finish them. So I don't think we're going to be able to finish on the road. Our record is what it is this season because we've won games at home. Our road record is abysmal. So the Western Conference games, I think, are going to hurt. And I think it's going to be a tough challenge for Cavaliers fans to keep their heads up in this time because the season started out pretty promising. We've had a lot of injury issues and then a lot of gelling with the team since then and the trades and all of that. So it's going to take a little more time for us to see winning basketball, and we just have to kind of take the good with the bad in the meantime. My hope is Steph Curry doesn't go off on us for 60. Those are the things I wish for. But, if he gets 55, I guess I'll be somewhat happy that he's...
Yeah. How do we feel we want the Cavs offense to move forward? Do we want it to go through Garland and Sexton as the primary initiators, or do we want Drummond to be the primary initiator? Also, can both of these things exist? Do we even want Drummond anymore? What are your thoughts on Drummond?
I think they've definitely been one of the bright spots of this season when they're playing consistently together, when they're able to get out on the court consistently together. Garland has definitely taken a step up. We've talked about that. He's averaging 17 points this season. His assists are up as well. I'd like to see him run the offense a little bit more. Sexton, I'm definitely impressed with his game this year. I will say, since coming back from his injury, I don't see the same Colin out on the court. I don't know if he's over attacking the basket too much. But I want to see him take some more mid-range jumpers, come off some screens without the ball. A benefit for Garland having a successful season so far, at least taking the steps that he has, is that Sexton can move into that shooting guard position more consistently or more predominantly moving forward. Before his ankle injury, I felt like he was spacing himself very well. He was taking a diversity of shots throughout the game. Lately, I'm seeing him kind of settle for attack the basket. And he's not making those shots. He may be even tiring himself out by kind of going to the hole too much. I love the way that he feels he can take anyone on in the league, but he's still an undersized player, especially if he's going to be playing at the 2. So he needs to maybe manage that a little bit differently. But again, they're definitely one of the brighter spots for this season. So for now, I don't see another option for us to look to offensively, unless you're going to lean on somebody like Drummond, and we've gone over why that's not working for the Cavs. Now with Garland, though, one final point on that. Again, he's got to start taking more threes and making more threes.
Yeah.
I want to see him stretch the defense by being someone that they have to take seriously from the arc.
I also think, too, that Garland is the best pull-up shooter on the team. He has the confidence and ability to have a little bit of swagger. His catch and shoot as well, I think, is the cleanest. The other thing that's really cool about Sexland is that they like each other. They like each other on and off the court. It's something that's so foreign to Cavs fans over the last 20 years. I think that Garland needs to be more of the primary runner of the offense. And I think Sexton's, his true Weapon X level of talent that can really unlock everything for him is his off-ball motor, because you references his ankle injury. That's what I'm seeing a little bit too, is he needs to be just kind of like what Steph does, what Rip Hamilton used to do, what Reggie Miller used to do. Sexton has the speed and tenacity to do that, and he does have the shooting touch to do that as well. I think that he can make almost every shot on the floor. It's just getting him in those right spots. Matthew Dellavedova has been sidelined since the beginning of the season with yet another concussion. He's had multiple in his career. Recent headlines suggest that he may have to retire, but he strongly stated otherwise with about 280 characters. That's right. He told his fans on Twitter that the rumors are not true. What do we think about Dellavedova, and what should the Cavs do with him?
Dellavedova's a sad story. He's had multiple concussions throughout his career. I couldn't even get an exact number on it. That's how many he's had. Because to me, if he's only had 2 or 3, they'd say 2 or 3. But he's at least had 2 or 3 in the last 2 seasons. I've been waiting for this. For weeks and weeks now, I've thought, this could be it. He might be forced into retirement. Because typically, if a guy doesn't come back from a concussion protocol in the first few weeks, it's something more serious. And having a history of it, yeah, the writing was on the wall. I was surprised, however, that he tweeted about it the next day, basically, when news had broke that he may have to consider this, and that he's excited to come back to the team. I don't know how to read it. I don't know if it means that he is just trying to find a greener pasture right now for the situation, or if he hasn't come to the realization yet for himself that this is it. I'm hoping for the best, I guess, for Delly. Not so much because I think we need him as a pivotal piece on the team. I think he's always been a better locker room guy, a coach before he's a coach, player's coach. I kind of imagine that's what his future would be if he wants it to be after this. It made sense when he left to go get his when he could. And it was exciting to have him come back because you knew he was that fan favorite and a team guy. But now we have Larry Nance Jr., who's a fan favorite and a team guy. That role can be taken away pretty quickly. It's kind of like what happened with Kevin Porter Jr. Yeah, you got personal stuff going on and we all care. But if you can't get back out on the court, the goal of the team is to fill that position and continue on. And so I just hope for the best for Delly moving forward. Always sad when a player can't make the choice themselves, but that's the case of a lot of people's at the end of their careers, and hopefully he'll have a swan song here. Hopefully he can come back and get a few more games in and be a part of what the Cavs are doing.
To touch on the amount of concussions, so When you see stars or you feel like you see birds or bright light at all after you've been hit in the head, that's a concussion. That's not getting your bell rung. That's not, whatever other turn of phrase you want to use to say that you're a tough guy and you can play through it. That's a concussion. So Delly's probably I wouldn't be surprised if he's had, almost a dozen throughout his entire playing career from a kid up until now. But I also think, too, I think they brought Delly in, you're right, as a character guy, as a locker room guy. He's known for his toughness and his grittiness, and the fact that he's not able to do that, I mean, he's going to have to possibly change his whole style of play at 30 years old. I just don't see how that happens. And I do think they need a backup point guard. I just hope that they work something out with him where he's able to still possibly stay on the team as a reserve, or maybe they hire him as an assistant coach or something to that effect, a player's coach. He knows what a point guard is supposed to do, but I don't know if physically he's going to be able to do that. The Cavs have a really tough decision here because they can't have Dotson as the backup point guard and Sexton and Prince, and sometimes Drummond thinks he is too. They need a backup point guard, and the Cavs just have a really tough decision when they make that, because that might mean that they have to release Delly, and that would just kind of suck.
All right, it's that time again. We have finished the podcast, episode 2 in the books. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back with episode 3 very soon.
Thanks. Have a great week, y'all.
Thank you for listening to the Cavaliers Basketball Club podcast. Let's go, Cavs!